The phone rang at 3:47 in the morning, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. In 23 years as a priest, I'd received plenty of late-night calls. Deaths, accidents, spiritual emergencies that couldn't wait until sunrise. But this was different. The voice on the other end didn't belong to any parishioner. It was cold, military, and carried the weight of something that transcended ordinary human crisis. "Father Dominic Ashford?" the voice asked, though it already knew the answer. "Yes, this is Father Ashford. Who is this?" "My name is Colonel Sarah Bennett. I'm calling on behalf of the United States Air Force. We need you to come with us immediately. There's a situation that requires your specific expertise." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. What kind of situation? If someone needs last rites, I can meet them at the hospital. "This isn't a hospital matter, Father. A car will arrive at your residence in 15 minutes. Pack enough clothes for 3 days. Tell no one where you're going. This is a matter of national security." The line went dead before I could ask another question. I should have refused. I should have demanded answers. But something in Colonel Bennett's voice told me that refusal wasn't really an option. 14 minutes later, a black SUV with government plates pulled up outside my small rectory in Colorado Springs. 2 men in dark suits escorted me inside without a word. We drove through the night, heading west into the Nevada desert, and nobody spoke for the entire journey. Dawn was breaking when we arrived at a facility that officially doesn't exist, Area 51. I'd heard the conspiracy theories like everyone else, but I'd dismissed them as fantasy. Now, as we passed through security checkpoint after security checkpoint, each one more intense than the last, I realized that some conspiracies are just truths that haven't been declassified yet. Colonel Bennett met me in a sterile white corridor deep underground. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. "Father Ashford, thank you for coming. I know this is highly irregular." "That's one word for it," I replied. "Colonel, what exactly am I doing here?" She took a breath, and for the first time since we'd met, I saw genuine uncertainty cross her face. 3 weeks ago, we recovered a craft of non-terrestrial origin approximately 40 miles north of here. There was one occupant. It's dying, Father, and it's been asking for you by name. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. That's impossible. How would... We don't know how it knows you. We don't know how it speaks perfect English. We don't understand most of what's happening, but it's been refusing all communication with anyone except you. And 2 hours ago, it made a specific request. She paused, struggling with the words. It asked to be baptized. Before I could process what she'd just said, she led me to an observation window. The room beyond was filled with monitoring equipment, medical devices I didn't recognize, and a transparent containment chamber. Inside that chamber was something that shattered every assumption I'd ever held about reality. The being was roughly humanoid in shape, but stood nearly 7 feet tall. Its skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shimmer between silver and translucent, revealing glimpses of something like luminous circuitry beneath. It had 4 fingers on each hand, and its head was larger than a human's, with eyes that held an intelligence that was unmistakably conscious, unmistakably aware. Those eyes found mine through the observation window, and I felt recognition pass between us. Not like meeting a stranger, like being seen by something that had been waiting for this moment. Father Dominic Ashford. The voice came through speakers in the observation room, resonant and otherworldly, yet speaking English with perfect clarity. Thank you for coming. I know this is difficult to comprehend, but I don't have much time, and there is something I must ask of you. something that may determine not just my fate, but the fate of your entire species. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. How do you know my name? I have been watching, waiting, searching across this world for someone who might understand what I'm about to ask. And then I found you, Father, a man who believes in the soul, a man who has devoted his life to the salvation of consciousness. I need you to answer a question that has tormented me across light years and centuries. The being moved closer to the glass, and I saw something in those alien eyes that I'd seen countless times in human faces. Desperation, fear of death, hope for something beyond the end. Can someone like me be saved? The question hung in the air like a theological bomb. Every instinct I had as a priest screamed that this was beyond my authority, beyond my understanding, beyond the scope of everything I'd been trained to handle. But another part of me, the part that had always believed that God's love was infinite, that grace extended beyond all human boundaries, wondered if this moment was exactly what I'd been preparing for my entire life. What you're about to hear has been kept from humanity for thousands of years. I need to warn you, once you understand this truth, your entire view of reality will shatter. This isn't comfortable. This will challenge everything you thought you knew. But if you're tired of the lies, if you're ready to see what's really happening, you need to subscribe and turn on notifications right now. Because what happened in that underground facility will expose a truth that powerful people don't want you to know. Colonel Bennett's voice cut through my thoughts. Father, we need an answer. Will you speak with it? I looked at that being, that creature, that consciousness behind the glass, and I made a decision that would change everything. Yes, I said, take me inside. They made me wear a hazmat suit before entering the containment chamber, though the scientists assured me the being posed no biological threat. The precaution was for my protection, they said, though I suspected it was more about maintaining protocol in a situation where all protocols had already been shattered. The airlock hissed open, and I stepped into the presence of something that shouldn't exist. Up close, the being was even more extraordinary. Its form seemed to pulse with a subtle inner light, and the air around it hummed with an energy I could feel in my bones. But what struck me most was the way it held itself. There was a weariness there, a weight that transcended physical exhaustion. I'd seen that posture before, in hospice rooms and deathbeds. This was a creature that knew its time was ending. Father Ashford. The being's voice no longer came through speakers, but resonated directly in the space between us. I am called Seraph. It is not my true name. My actual designation exists in frequencies your vocal cords cannot produce, but it is close enough, and it seems fitting given what I must ask of you. Seraph, I repeated, the theological irony not lost on me. The word meant burning one, a class of angels in ancient Hebrew tradition. How long have you been watching us? I first came to your world in what you would call the year 1637. I have returned 43 times since then, observing, studying, trying to understand what makes your species so fundamentally different from every other form of intelligent life I have encountered in 312 star systems across this galaxy. The numbers were staggering, but I forced myself to focus. Different how? Seraph moved closer, and I saw something that looked like pain cross its features. You believe in redemption, Father, true redemption. Not merely the absence of punishment or the correction of behavior, but the fundamental transformation of the soul through grace. In all my travels, across civilizations that span millions of years, I have never encountered another species that possesses this concept. And I need you to understand why that matters. Why I have come to you now, at the end of my life, to ask for something I do not deserve. Tell me, I said quietly. I have sinned, Father Ashford, not in the small ways that humans sin against each other, but in ways that haunt me across the vastness of space and time. My people, we are explorers, scientists, philosophers. We believed ourselves enlightened beyond the primitive moral struggles of lesser species. We were wrong. Seraph's form seemed to dim slightly, and the monitoring equipment around us registered what looked like a drop in vital signs. The being was weakening, even as it spoke. There was a world. We called it Kepler 442b in your astronomical designations. It housed a species of aquatic beings, intelligent but primitive by our standards. They had just discovered fire, just begun to create art and music. They were on the cusp of something beautiful, and my people decided they were in the way. The words hung in the air like a confession in a church, heavy with the weight of terrible truth. We needed the planet's resources, rare elements for our technology. We told ourselves it was necessary, that our advancement, our survival, justified the cost. So we displaced them, relocated them to a moon with similar atmospheric conditions. We thought we were being merciful. We didn't understand that we were destroying everything that made their existence meaningful. What happened to them? I asked, though I already knew the answer would break my heart. They died. All of them. Within 3 generations. Not from physical hardship. We'd ensured they had everything they needed to survive. They died because we'd severed them from their ancestral waters, from the breeding grounds that held spiritual significance we didn't comprehend, from the very context that gave their lives meaning. We committed genocide not through violence, but through ignorance so profound it amounted to evil. I watched as something that looked like tears, though they were drops of liquid light, fell from Seraph's eyes. That was not the only world, Father. Not the only time we acted with certainty in our righteousness and left devastation in our wake. I personally participated in 7 such relocations. 7 species diminished or destroyed because we valued our needs above their existence. And the worst part? Seraph's voice cracked with something that sounded exactly like human anguish. We felt no guilt, no remorse, not until I came here. Not until I began to study your species and discovered something we had lost so long ago we didn't even remember it existed. The concept of sin, I said softly. More than that. The concept that sin can be acknowledged, confessed, and forgiven. That consciousness can be transformed. That the weight of terrible acts doesn't have to define us eternally. My people evolved beyond guilt, Father. We thought it was progress. But you humans, you understood something we forgot. You understood that guilt exists because the soul exists. That remorse is the proof of consciousness recognizing its own capacity for evil and crying out for redemption. Seraph moved closer still, and I could see its alien features contorted with an emotion I recognized from thousands of confessions. I am dying, Father Ashford. My biological systems are incompatible with Earth's atmosphere. I have perhaps 2 days remaining, and in those 2 days, I face a terror that no technology can solve. Because if you humans are right, if consciousness does continue beyond death, if there is judgment and accounting, then I am damned. Unless, the being's voice dropped to a whisper, unless there is grace, unless redemption extends even to something like me. I stood there in that containment chamber, facing a question that no seminary had prepared me to answer. Before me was a being from another world, confessing sins against species I'd never heard of, asking for salvation through a sacrament designed for humans. Every theological text I'd ever studied said this was impossible. But looking into those eyes, seeing that suffering, that genuine remorse, that desperate hope for forgiveness, how could I see anything but a soul crying out for mercy? I need time to think, I told Seraph, my mind reeling from everything I'd just heard. This is beyond anything I was trained for. I need to pray. I need guidance. I understand, Father. Time is something I have very little of, but I will wait for your answer. Colonel Bennett escorted me out of the containment chamber and down another sterile corridor. But instead of taking me to quarters where I could rest and pray, she led me to a conference room where a man in a dark suit was waiting. He was older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had kept secrets for a very long time. Father Ashford, this is Director James Caldwell. He oversees religious and cultural affairs for this facility. Caldwell extended his hand, and I shook it automatically, still dazed from my encounter with Seraph. Father, please sit down. What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest possible level. You've already been cleared because of the circumstances, but I need you to understand. This information has been kept from the public, from most government officials, and from the majority of the church itself for centuries. He opened a laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a document with Vatican letterhead, dated 1613. This is the papal brief of secret doctrine regarding non-terrestrial intelligence, Caldwell said. It was written by Pope Paul V after a series of encounters in the Italian countryside. Farmers reported seeing angels that didn't match any biblical description. The church investigated and discovered something that challenged everything they thought they knew about creation. I leaned forward, reading the Latin text. My hands began to shake as I translated the words in my mind. They knew, I whispered. The church has known about extraterrestrial life for over 400 years. Not just known, Father, documented, studied, and prepared for. Caldwell pulled up another file. In 1687, the Vatican created Protocol 7. It's a theological framework for dealing with exactly what you're facing right now, the question of whether non-human intelligent beings possess souls and can receive the sacraments. The document outlined a series of criteria. Could the being demonstrate self-awareness? Could it recognize the concept of right and wrong? Could it express genuine contrition? Could it articulate a desire for spiritual transformation? The theological reasoning was complex, but the conclusion was clear. If a non-human entity met these criteria, it possessed what the document called the divine spark of consciousness and could, theoretically, receive the sacraments. Why keep this secret? I demanded. Why not tell people that we're not alone in the universe? Because the world wasn't ready then, and frankly, we're not sure it's ready now, Caldwell replied. The social upheaval, the religious crises, the existential terror, the decision was made to wait until contact became inevitable. And Father, I need you to understand something else, something personal. He pulled up a photograph, black and white, grainy, dated July 1947. It showed a crash site in the New Mexico desert. Military personnel surrounded wreckage that was clearly not from any human aircraft, and standing among them, wearing a priest's collar, was a man who looked exactly like me. That's Father Michael Ashford, your grandfather. The room tilted. That's impossible. My grandfather died when I was 5. He was a parish priest in Boston. He was recruited, just like you. There was another incident. Roswell, though not the Roswell incident the public knows about. There were 2 crashes that summer, Father. The second one was kept even more secret than the first. And in that crash, there was a survivor who asked for last rites. Caldwell pulled up more documents, reports written in my grandfather's handwriting, theological reflections, doubts, prayers, and finally, a decision. He performed the sacrament, I said, reading through tears that blurred the pages. He baptized a dying alien, and then he spent the rest of his life keeping that secret. He did more than that, Father. He helped establish the protocols we still use today. He wrote position papers that were sent directly to the Vatican. And according to his final report, written 3 days before he died, he never once regretted his decision. He believed that God's grace was infinite, that it extended to all conscious beings, and that denying the sacrament to a soul in need would be the greater sin. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. My grandfather, the man who'd taught me my first prayers, who'd inspired me to enter the priesthood, had faced this exact same impossible choice and had chosen mercy over dogma. Why me? I asked. Why was I chosen for this? That's the thing, Father. Seraph specifically asked for you by name. When we asked how it knew you, it said it had been watching the Ashford family for 3 generations. It said your grandfather showed it something that changed its understanding of what humans are, and now, at the end of its life, it wanted to make the same request of his grandson. Caldwell pulled up one final document. A letter, written in my grandfather's hand, sealed and marked, to be opened only by Father Dominic Ashford in the event of extraterrestrial contact. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal that had been in place for over 70 years. The letter was short, but every word felt like it had been written specifically for this moment. Dominic, if you're reading this, then you've encountered what I encountered. A consciousness from beyond our world, seeking something only we can offer. You're facing the same question I faced. Does God's love extend beyond humanity? I can't tell you what to choose, but I can tell you this. I performed that baptism not because I was certain it was theologically correct, but because I was certain that refusing would be theologically wrong. Grace is not ours to withhold. If a soul cries out for God, who are we to say God cannot answer? Trust your heart, grandson. Trust that the same Spirit that guided the apostles will guide you. And know that whatever you decide, I am proud of you. Love, Grandfather Michael. I folded the letter carefully and looked at Caldwell and Colonel Bennett. They were waiting for my decision, but I realized the decision had already been made. Not by me, but by something larger than all of us. I returned to the containment chamber 6 hours later after reading through my grandfather's documents and spending time in prayer. The facility had set up a small chapel for me, a sterile room with a cross and a single chair, but it was enough. I'd asked God for guidance, for wisdom, for the courage to do what was right, even when I couldn't be certain what right meant. Seraph was weaker when I entered. The luminescence beneath its skin had dimmed, and the monitoring equipment showed vital signs that were clearly declining. It looked up as I approached, and I saw something like relief in those alien eyes. You came back. I wasn't certain you would. I need to understand more, I said, pulling a chair close to the containment field. You've traveled across the galaxy, encountered hundreds of intelligent species. Tell me about them. Help me understand what makes humanity different. Seraph settled into a position that might have been sitting, though its physiology made the posture strange to human eyes. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of centuries. The first civilization I encountered was the Caliph. They lived on a world orbiting a red dwarf star in what you call the Gliese system. They were ancient, Father. Their civilization had existed for 2.3 million years. They had conquered death itself through technology, transferring consciousness into synthetic bodies, backing up their minds into quantum storage. They were, by every measure, immortal. That sounds like paradise, I said. It was hell. Seraph's form pulsed with something that looked like sorrow. They had forgotten how to create, how to love, how to hope for anything beyond the endless repetition of existence. I spent 3 years among them, and in all that time, I never saw a single Caliph express joy. They had achieved technological perfection and lost their souls in the process. Eventually, they simply stopped, ceased functioning, chose non-existence over eternal emptiness. The last one I spoke with told me they had evolved beyond the need for meaning, only to discover that meaning was the only thing worth having. I leaned forward, captivated despite the horror of what I was hearing. Then there were the Vorath, a hive mind spanning an entire planetary system, billions of individual bodies, all connected into one vast consciousness. Perfect unity, perfect cooperation, no conflict, no war, no suffering caused by misunderstanding, and no individual thought, no personal choice, no single voice crying out, "I exist, I matter, I choose." They were efficient, peaceful, and utterly devoid of what you would call personhood. Seraph's eyes met mine, and I saw a desperate need for me to understand. I have witnessed species that achieved perfect logic and lost compassion, species that mastered their emotions and lost passion, species that eliminated all suffering by eliminating the capacity to care about anything. And everywhere I went, Father, I found the same emptiness. Consciousness without consequence, intelligence without soul. What changed? I asked. What brought you to Earth? Desperation, Seraph admitted. I was searching for something I couldn't name. A quality that my people had lost so long ago, we didn't even have words for it anymore. And then, 387 years ago, I intercepted a radio signal from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. It was a human voice, broadcasting from a church in Rome, speaking about resurrection, about life after death, about eternal consciousness. The being's form brightened slightly, as if the memory itself provided energy. I came to investigate. I expected to find another primitive species clinging to comforting myths about survival. Instead, I found something extraordinary. You humans believe consciousness continues after biological death, and that belief shapes everything about how you live. You create art that will outlast you. You plant trees whose shade you'll never sit under. You sacrifice your own well-being for future generations you'll never meet. You act as if your choices have eternal consequences, and that very belief makes you behave in ways no other species does. But it's not just belief, is it? I said quietly. You think it's actually true. Seraph's voice dropped to a whisper, and I had to lean closer to hear. In my travels, I have measured countless forms of energy: electromagnetic radiation, quantum entanglement, gravitational waves, forces your science hasn't even discovered yet. But there is one form of energy I have detected only in the presence of human consciousness, a resonance that emanates from your minds, your souls, whatever you want to call it. And Father, This resonance doesn't dissipate at death. It transforms, transitions, moves into a dimension that all our technology cannot access or fully measure. My breath caught in my throat. You have scientific evidence of the soul? Evidence of something your religious texts have been describing for thousands of years. Every other species I've studied, when they die, their consciousness simply ceases. The energy dissipates. The patterns dissolve. But humans? Seraph's voice filled with something that sounded like awe. Human consciousness generates a frequency that persists beyond biological termination. You are, quite literally, beings designed to transcend death. And I believe that is because you were created that way, designed by something far greater than any technology I have encountered. You believe in God, I said, and it wasn't a question. I believe in something beyond the material universe, something that embedded eternity into human consciousness. And I believe that if such a being exists, and if it cared enough to create souls capable of eternal existence, then perhaps, just perhaps, it cares enough to redeem those souls, even a soul like mine, foreign and broken as it is. Seraph's vital signs dropped again, and alarms began to sound. Medical personnel rushed in, but there was nothing they could do. We both knew it. I am dying, Father Ashford, and I am more terrified than I have ever been, because if you humans are right about eternity, then I am about to face judgment for sins I cannot undo. Please, I am begging you, if there is grace, if there is mercy, if there is redemption, help me find it before it's too late. The medical team stabilized Seraph enough to buy us another day, maybe 2 at most. Colonel Bennett gave me access to a secure communication room where I could make the call I'd been dreading. Cardinal Vasquez had been my mentor since seminary, the man who'd guided me through every theological crisis I'd ever faced. But this was beyond anything either of us had studied. The video screen flickered to life, and I saw Cardinal Vasquez's familiar face. He was in Rome, in what looked like a private office in the Vatican. But his expression told me he already knew why I was calling. Dominic, he said, and his voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. I received word from the American military 6 hours ago about your situation. I've been praying ever since, asking for wisdom we may not possess. Father, I don't know what to do. I have a dying being before me, demonstrating every sign of genuine consciousness, genuine remorse, genuine faith. It's asking for baptism. My grandfather faced this same choice and said yes, but I need to know, does Christ's sacrifice extend beyond humanity? Cardinal Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with the question. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. The traditional interpretation has always been that the incarnation was specific to humanity. Jesus came as a human, to save humans, to restore the relationship between God and mankind. The entire framework of salvation history is built around earth, around Adam and Eve, around the specific covenant between God and humanity. But is that because salvation only applies to humans, or because humans were the only ones who needed it? I pressed. Seraph has shown me evidence that human consciousness is fundamentally different from other species, that we alone possess souls capable of eternal existence. What if that's because we alone were created in God's image? What if consciousness itself is that image? That's a dangerous theological leap, Dominic. Is it? Genesis says God created man in his image, but it doesn't define what that image means. We've always assumed it meant physical form, or rationality, or moral capacity. But what if it means something deeper, the capacity for eternal relationship with the divine, the ability to recognize sin and seek redemption, the presence of a soul that transcends biological death. I stood up, pacing the small room as the words poured out of me. Seraph has consciousness, self-awareness, moral understanding, the capacity for remorse, and the desire for transformation. It recognizes its sins and seeks forgiveness. If those qualities don't constitute a soul, then what does? And if it has a soul, how can we claim that God's grace doesn't extend to it? Cardinal Vasquez leaned forward, his face troubled. But Dominic, the sacrament of baptism requires faith in Jesus Christ. How can a non-human being have faith in a specifically human Savior? It does have faith, I said. Faith that consciousness continues after death. Faith that there is judgment and mercy. Faith that a being greater than itself can offer redemption. Seraph may not know the name Jesus Christ, but it knows the concept that name represents. Isn't that what faith really is? Not intellectual assent to specific doctrines, but trust in divine grace? You're arguing that the substance of faith matters more than its specific theological formulation. I'm arguing that God is bigger than our theological formulations. That if a conscious being cries out for mercy, God hears that cry regardless of what planet it comes from. The cardinal was silent again, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. There's something you need to know, Dominic. You're not the only person watching this conversation. His Holiness the Pope has been monitoring your situation from the beginning. The question you're facing has implications far beyond one dying alien. If we say yes to this, we're fundamentally redefining the scope of salvation. If we say no, we're claiming to limit God's grace in ways that may not be ours to limit. My heart pounded. The Pope is watching this? He is, and he's just as uncertain as we are. This is uncharted territory, Dominic. Protocol 7 gives you the theological framework, but it doesn't make the decision for you. That responsibility falls on the priest in the room with the dying soul, just as it fell on your grandfather. I thought about my grandfather's letter, about his conviction that refusing grace would be the greater sin. Father, tell me this. If a human came to you, someone who had never heard of Christianity, never read the Bible, never been taught doctrine, but who recognized their own sin and desperately sought forgiveness from whatever higher power existed, would you turn them away? No, the cardinal admitted. The Church has always taught that those who seek God with sincere hearts, even in ignorance of specific revelation, can be saved through what we call baptism of desire. Then how is this different? Seraph seeks God with a sincere heart. It recognizes sin. It desires redemption. It asks for the sacrament because it has observed that this is how humans formalize their relationship with the divine. Isn't that the very definition of baptism of desire? Cardinal Vasquez closed his eyes, and I saw him mouth what might have been a prayer. When he opened them again, there was a clarity there that hadn't been present before. Dominic, I cannot tell you what to do. No one can. But I can tell you this. The essence of the gospel is that God's love is infinite, and His grace is sufficient for all who seek it. If you truly believe that Seraph possesses a soul, if you truly believe its remorse is genuine and its desire for redemption is real, then you already know what you must do. The only question is whether you have the courage to do it. Even if the entire Church disagrees, even if I'm excommunicated for this, you won't be, the cardinal said, and now I heard certainty in his voice. His Holiness just sent me a message. He says to tell you that whatever decision you make, you will have the support of Rome. that sometimes the Church must be brave enough to recognize that God's mercy exceeds our understanding, that perhaps this moment is exactly what Protocol 7 was created for, not to restrict grace, but to extend it when the time was right. I felt tears streaming down my face. "There's one more thing," Cardinal Vasquez added. "If you do this, Dominic, document everything, because what you're about to do may change theology forever." I ended the call with Cardinal Vasquez feeling something close to certainty for the first time since arriving at this facility. But that certainty was about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. Colonel Bennett was waiting for me outside the communication room, and her expression had changed. The careful respect she'd shown before had been replaced by something harder, more calculating. "Father Ashford, General Morrison would like to speak with you. Now." The way she said it left no room for negotiation. She led me to a different section of the facility, through corridors that felt progressively more militarized, less scientific. We entered a briefing room where a man in a crisp uniform covered with medals and insignia sat at the head of a long table. General Richard Morrison. Even sitting down, he radiated authority and threat in equal measure. "Father Ashford, sit down." I sat, feeling suddenly like I was being interrogated rather than consulted. "I've been listening to your conversations," Morrison said without preamble. "With the entity, with your cardinal. Very touching, very philosophical. Now, let me tell you why you're really here." He pulled up a holographic display showing complex mathematical formulas and engineering diagrams I couldn't begin to understand. That thing in containment possesses technology that is approximately 15,000 years ahead of our current capabilities. In the 3 weeks we've held it, we've learned more about quantum mechanics, faster than light travel, and energy generation than we've discovered in the last century. This isn't just about scientific advancement, Father. This is about national security, about ensuring American dominance in an arena we didn't even know existed until last month. "What does this have to do with baptism?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand where this was going. "The entity refuses to share critical information, propulsion systems, weapons technology, methods for detecting other extraterrestrial craft. It says it will only provide this information after it receives baptism. We believe it's using this religious request as leverage." Morrison leaned forward, his eyes hard as steel. "Here's what's going to happen, Father. You're going to perform whatever ceremony it wants. You're going to say the words, do the ritual, make it believe it's been saved. And then it's going to give us what we need before it dies. After that, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, return to your parish, and never speak of this again. Are we clear?" The room felt suddenly cold despite the controlled temperature. I looked at General Morrison and saw something that made my stomach turn. He wasn't asking me to minister to a dying soul. He was asking me to participate in a con, to prostitute the sacrament for military intelligence. "No," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said no, General. I won't perform a fake baptism. I won't lie to a dying conscious being for the sake of technology." Morrison's face darkened. "Father, you don't seem to understand the stakes here. This isn't about your religious scruples. This is about the security of the United States and potentially the entire human race. If there are hostile extraterrestrial forces out there, we need to be prepared. That entity has information that could save millions of lives." "Or take millions of lives," I countered. "General, you're talking about weapons technology, about military dominance. You're not trying to protect humanity. You're trying to figure out how to kill beings from other worlds more efficiently. That's not your concern, Father. Your concern is following orders." I stood up, feeling anger rise in me like a tide. "I don't take orders from you, General. I answer to a higher authority, and that authority commands me not to bear false witness, not to use sacred things for profane purposes, and not to treat conscious beings as mere tools to be exploited." Morrison stood as well, and I realized just how physically imposing he was. But I'd faced down bullies before, and I refused to be intimidated. "Let me be very clear about something," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "If I perform baptism on Seraph, it will be genuine. A real sacrament for a real soul. Not a trick, not a manipulation, not a transaction. And if Seraph chooses to share its knowledge afterward, that will be its choice, freely made, not something extracted through deception. You're making a mistake, Father. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. And if you try to force me to perform a false ceremony, I'll refuse entirely. Then you'll have a dead alien, no technology, and an international incident when I go public with what you tried to make me do." It was a bluff. I'd signed enough security documents that going public would land me in federal prison. But Morrison didn't need to know how serious I was about that threat. The general stared at me for a long moment, then sat back down, his expression unreadable. "You really believe it has a soul, don't you?" "I do." "Why? Because it can talk? Because it can manipulate emotions? Father, this entity has had 3 weeks to study human psychology, human religion, human vulnerabilities. How do you know this entire request isn't exactly what I suspect? A calculated manipulation designed to get what it wants before it dies?" The question hit me harder than I wanted to admit. How did I know? How could I be certain that Seraph's remorse was genuine, that its desire for redemption was real and not just an elaborate performance? And then I realized something that made everything suddenly clear. "You're right, General. I can't be absolutely certain. But here's what I do know. If Seraph is genuine, and I refuse the sacrament or perform it falsely, I've damned a soul for the sake of political expedience. But if Seraph is manipulating me, and I perform the baptism in good faith, then I've simply been fooled. I can live with being fooled, General. I can't live with damning a genuine soul because I was too cynical to recognize it." Morrison studied me for another long moment, then waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. Do it your way, Father. Perform your real ceremony. Save its soul or get played for a fool. I don't care which. But understand this. If that entity dies without giving us actionable intelligence, the blood of future human casualties is on your conscience, not mine." I walked out of that briefing room with my hands shaking but my resolve firm, because I understood now what Seraph's request really was. It wasn't just about one alien seeking salvation. It was a test of what humanity valued, technology or truth, power or principle, expedience or integrity. And I had just decided which side of that test I stood on. I returned to Seraph's containment chamber immediately after my confrontation with General Morrison. The being had deteriorated further in the hours I'd been away. Its luminescence had faded to barely a flicker, and the medical monitors showed vital signs that were failing across multiple systems. "Father Ashford." Seraph's voice was weaker now, barely above a whisper. "I heard your conversation with the general. The monitoring systems in this facility record everything. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I'm sorry they see you as nothing more than a source of technology. Don't apologize. You defended me. You defended the very concept of my soul against pragmatic evil. You passed the first test." I moved closer to the containment field. "Test? Seraph, Is the general right? Is this all manipulation? No, Father, but it is a test. Not of you specifically, but of your entire species. My people have encountered 97 intelligent civilizations across this galaxy. Do you know how many have passed this particular test? How many chose principle over profit when faced with a dying stranger offering advanced knowledge in exchange for spiritual comfort? The silence stretched between us, and I was afraid to hear the answer. None, Seraph said finally. 0. Every other species we encountered saw us as resources to be exploited or threats to be eliminated, never as souls to be saved. That's why I came to Earth, Father, because in 387 years of observation, I've seen humans do something no other species does. You sacrifice for strangers. You comfort the dying even when there's no benefit to you. You believe in redemption, not just for yourselves, but for anyone who seeks it. And I needed to know if that quality would hold even when facing something as alien as me. And if I had agreed to the General's plan, if I'd performed a fake baptism, then I would have known that humanity's grace extends only as far as its self-interest, that your spiritual beliefs are just another tool for manipulation. But you didn't, Father. Even when threatened, even when told that refusing might cost human lives, you chose to honor the sacred. That tells me something profound about your species. Seraph's form pulsed weakly, and alarms began sounding again. Medical staff rushed in, but Seraph waved them away with one trembling hand. I don't have much time left, Father. Hours, perhaps. Before I die, I want to give you something. Not technology for your military. Not weapons or propulsion systems. Something far more valuable. I want to give you proof. Proof of what? Proof that everything your faith teaches about the eternal nature of the soul is true. Seraph gestured to one of the technicians. Bring the resonance recorder, the one we've been using to study human consciousness. The technician looked uncertain, glancing at Colonel Bennett, who had entered the room. She nodded, and he brought over a device that looked like a crystalline sphere surrounded by holographic displays. This technology, Seraph explained, can detect and record what we call the consciousness resonance. It's a quantum frequency that emanates from all self-aware beings. Most species generate a low-level resonance that dissipates at death, like heat leaving a cooling body. But humans are different. Seraph activated the device, and the holographic display came to life. I saw waveforms, frequencies, patterns of energy that meant nothing to me. I've been recording the resonance signatures of every human who has died in hospitals within a 50-mile radius of this facility for the past 3 weeks. Watch what happens at the moment of biological death. The display showed a complex pattern of energy, the human consciousness resonance. Then, at a specific timestamp, something extraordinary occurred. The energy didn't dissipate. It transformed. The frequency shifted into a spectrum that the device could barely register, moving into what Seraph called higher dimensional space. The soul doesn't die, Father. It transitions, moves into a realm that exists beyond the 4 dimensions my technology can fully measure. Every human death I've recorded shows the same pattern. The consciousness continues. It goes somewhere. I stared at the display, my hands trembling. This is real? This isn't just energy dispersing? Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. Your own physics teaches this. But this is more than simple transformation. This is intentional transition. Watch the pattern closely. See how the resonance actively moves toward something? It's not random dispersal. It's purposeful movement toward a destination. Seraph changed the display, showing recordings from other species, the Kalith, the Vorath, a dozen others I couldn't name, In every case, at the moment of death, the resonance simply faded, dissipated, ceased to exist in any measurable form. Only humans do this, Father. Only human consciousness generates a resonance that survives biological death and transitions to another plane of existence. This is why my people studied you, why I became obsessed with understanding your species. You are, quite literally, beings designed to be eternal. Why? I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Why are we different? Because you were made that way, designed by something with the power to embed eternity into biological consciousness. Your religious texts call this being God. My people have other names for it. But the evidence is undeniable. Humanity didn't evolve this capacity naturally. It was engineered into you by an intelligence far beyond anything I've encountered in 312 star systems. Seraph's form flickered, and I could see it was using its last reserves of energy to show me this. But here's what terrifies me, Father. I can see the resonance. I can measure it. I can watch it transition at death, but I cannot follow it. My consciousness, my species' consciousness, doesn't generate the same frequency. When we die, we simply end. Unless there's grace, I finished. Unless redemption can transform you, give you what humans have naturally. Exactly. That's why I need baptism, Father. Not as a cultural ritual, not as manipulation, but as transformation. As the only possible bridge between what I am and what I need to become to survive death. I'm asking you to perform a miracle, to extend to me the same eternal quality that humanity possesses, to make me, for one sacred moment, human enough to be saved. I looked at the displays, still showing the undeniable evidence of human souls transcending death, then back at Seraph's dying form. The being wasn't asking for information or power. It was asking for the one thing I'd been ordained to offer: a chance at eternal life. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like physical force. I stood in that containment chamber, surrounded by technology I didn't understand, facing a being from another world, holding in my hands the power to offer salvation or withhold it. Every instinct trained into me by years of seminary, every theological boundary I'd been taught to respect, screamed that this was beyond my authority. But another voice spoke louder, the voice that had called me to priesthood in the first place, the voice that whispered that grace was not mine to withhold, only to offer. "I'll do it," I said, and the words seemed to echo in the sterile chamber. "I'll baptize you, Seraph." The being's form brightened for just a moment, a flicker of hope in the dying light. "You're certain? Your general will be furious. Your church may question you. Your entire career could be destroyed by this decision." "I'm certain. Because if God is who I believe He is, infinite, loving, merciful beyond human comprehension, then His grace cannot be limited by biology or planetary origin. You have consciousness. You have moral awareness. You recognize sin and seek redemption. Those qualities define a soul, Seraph, and I cannot, I will not, turn away a soul that cries out for God." Colonel Bennett stepped forward, her face conflicted. "Father, the general gave explicit orders. The general doesn't have authority over the sacraments, Colonel. No one does except God and the conscience of the priest administering them. I'm going to do this. You can court-martial me afterward if you want, but right now I have a dying soul to attend to." She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make sure you have what you need. And Father, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." The medical monitors showed Seraph's condition deteriorating rapidly. We had hours at most, maybe less. I needed to prepare, and I needed to do it quickly. Seraph, I need to explain what baptism means in Christian theology. It's not just a ritual, it's a death and rebirth, a washing away of the old self and the emergence of a new creation. It requires faith, genuine trust in God's grace. It requires repentance, true sorrow for sins committed, and it requires acceptance, choosing to turn away from your former life and embrace transformation. Can you offer all of that? I can, Father. I have spent 3 weeks in this chamber doing nothing but reflecting on my sins, mourning the lives I destroyed, and hoping desperately that somewhere in this vast universe there is mercy for creatures like me. I have faith that the being who created consciousness itself can redeem even the most broken consciousness. I repent of everything I have done, and I accept whatever transformation is required, even if it means becoming something entirely different from what I am now. I saw the medical staff preparing equipment, checking monitors, documenting everything. This was going to be recorded, analyzed, studied. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the soul before me. I need water, I said. Blessed water, if possible, but any pure water will do, and I need my stole and ritual book from my quarters. The staff scrambled to fulfill my requests. Within 20 minutes, I had everything I needed. The water was from the facility's purified supply. It would have to be blessed in the moment. My purple stole hung around my neck, the symbol of my priestly authority. The ritual book was open to the baptismal rites, though I knew most of the words by heart. I approached the containment field. Seraph, I need to be able to touch you, to pour water over you. Can the field be lowered safely? The technicians consulted their instruments. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, nodded. The entity doesn't pose any biological threat. We can lower the field. The shimmer of energy dissipated, and suddenly there was nothing between me and this being from the stars, except air and faith. I stepped closer, carrying a simple metal bowl filled with water. Before we begin, I said, I need to ask you the traditional questions. Seraph, do you reject sin so as to live in the freedom of God's children? I do. Do you reject the glamour of evil and refuse to be mastered by sin? I do. I have seen where the path of unexamined conscience leads, and I reject it utterly. Do you reject Satan, father of sin and prince of darkness? Seraph paused at this question. I do not know this being you name Satan, but I reject the force of entropy that pulls consciousness away from the divine. I reject the voice that says efficiency matters more than compassion, that progress justifies any cost, that the strong need not consider the weak. If that is what you mean by Satan, then yes, I reject it with every fiber of my being. I felt tears streaming down my face. This was real. This was genuine. Whatever Seraph was, whatever alien biology animated its form, it possessed something unmistakably sacred. Do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth? I believe in the being who embedded eternity into human consciousness, who designed a universe where grace is possible, who created not just matter and energy, but meaning and purpose. Yes, Father, I believe. Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was born of the Virgin Mary, was crucified, died, and was buried, rose from the dead, and is now seated at the right hand of the Father? This was the moment of greatest theological uncertainty. How could a non-human believe in a specifically human Savior? But Seraph's answer stopped my doubt cold. I believe in the principle that the divine can enter the material, that grace can take physical form, that sacrifice offered in love can redeem those who do not deserve redemption. If Jesus Christ embodies that principle, then yes, I believe in him. I believe in grace made flesh. I raise the bowl of water, my hands steady, despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Then, Seraph, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The water touched Seraph's skin, and the universe held its breath. For a single heartbeat, nothing happened. The water ran down the being's translucent form, catching the dim light of the containment chamber. I completed the sign of the cross over Seraph's body, whispering the ancient words that had been spoken over countless humans for 2,000 years, now offered to a consciousness born under alien stars. Then reality shifted. Every monitoring device in the facility began screaming at once. Alarms blared. Screens filled with data that scrolled faster than human eyes could follow. The resonance recorder that Seraph had used to show me proof of the human soul suddenly blazed with light, its holographic displays expanding to fill half the chamber. "What's happening?" Colonel Bennett shouted over the cacophony. The young technician stared at her instruments, her face pale with awe. The entity's consciousness resonance, it's changing. The frequency is shifting into the same spectrum as human souls. It's transforming in real time. I watched as Seraph's body began to glow from within, not with the dim flicker it had shown before, but with radiant brilliance that grew stronger with each passing second. The being's form seemed to become less solid, more luminous, as if the physical structure was giving way to something beyond matter. "Father!" Seraph's voice filled the chamber, stronger now than it had been in days, resonating with harmonics that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to my soul. "It's working. I can feel it. The transformation. The grace. It's real, Father. It's real." The resonance displays showed patterns I'd seen before, the same purposeful movement toward higher dimensional space that characterized human death. But this was different, stronger, more visible, as if whatever barrier had separated Seraph's consciousness from the eternal realm was dissolving before our eyes. Seraph turned those alien eyes to me one final time, and I saw in them something I'll carry with me until my own death. Joy, pure, overwhelming joy. Thank you, Father Dominic Ashford. Thank you for seeing past biology to recognize a soul. Thank you for having the courage to extend grace when you could have withheld it. You have given me what 312 star systems could not provide: hope, redemption. And now, as I die, I go not into oblivion, but into the eternal. The being's body was almost entirely light now, barely maintaining physical form. The medical monitors showed vital signs failing across every system, but somehow this didn't feel like death. It felt like birth. "Tell your species something," Seraph continued, its voice taking on qualities that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Tell them what they are, what they've always been. You humans are bridges, Father, bridges between the material and the divine. Every other species I encountered was bound to one realm or the other, either trapped in pure physicality or evolved into pure energy with no connection to the sacred. But humans? You exist in both realms simultaneously. That's why your consciousness generates the resonance. That's why your souls survive death. You were designed to be the meeting point between creation and creator." The light intensified, and I had to shield my eyes. Around me, scientists and soldiers alike stood transfixed, watching something that no amount of training had prepared them for. "This is why you must never lose your faith." Seraph's voice grew softer now, more distant, as if already speaking from somewhere beyond our dimension. Not faith in any specific doctrine or denomination, but faith in the fundamental truth that consciousness is eternal, that grace is real, that love transcends all boundaries, including death itself. Because without that faith, you lose what makes you unique in the universe. You lose your connection to the divine. You become like all the other species, brilliant but empty, powerful but purposeless, immortal in body, but dead in soul. The resonance displays showed Seraph's consciousness beginning its transition. The same purposeful movement I'd seen in the recordings of human deaths, but amplified, visible even without instruments. Streamers of light seemed to flow from Seraph's form, moving upward and inward simultaneously, as if traveling through dimensions we couldn't perceive. I see it now, Father, the realm your souls enter. It's beautiful beyond description. Infinite love, infinite light, infinite grace, and I'm being welcomed. Welcomed. Me, who destroyed species and called it progress. Me, who sinned across galaxies. But I'm washed clean, made new, given the same gift you offer to the worst of humanity, redemption through grace. Tears streamed down my face, and I wasn't alone. I saw Colonel Bennett crying openly. Even some of the hardened military personnel had tears in their eyes. We were witnessing something that transcended science, transcended military objectives, transcended every petty concern that had brought us to this moment. One last thing, Seraph whispered, its voice now barely audible. The others are coming, more of my kind, more species from across the stars. They've been watching, waiting to see if humanity would pass this test. You did, Father. You chose grace over greed, compassion over exploitation, faith over fear. Tell your people to be ready. Tell them that first contact won't be what they expect. It will be souls seeking souls, consciousness recognizing consciousness. And if they remember what you've shown me here today, that grace is infinite and love knows no boundaries, then humanity will lead this galaxy into something beautiful. The light became blinding. Seraph's physical form dissolved completely, transforming into pure radiance that filled the entire chamber. The resonance displays peaked, showing frequencies so high they exceeded the instrument's ability to measure. And then, in a moment of impossible beauty, the light contracted into a single point of brilliance and vanished. Not vanished into nothing, vanished into somewhere else. Somewhere the instruments could no longer follow, but that faith said was real. Seraph was gone, but not dead, transformed. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of people weeping. The resonance recorder powered down slowly, its displays showing one final message in patterns of light that seemed almost deliberately formed. Confirmed transition. Consciousness sustained. Destination beyond measurable parameters. I fell to my knees, still clutching the empty bowl that had held the baptismal water. I had just witnessed what every person of faith hopes is true, but can never quite prove. I had seen a soul transcend death. I had watched grace transform consciousness itself. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. 3 days passed in a blur of debriefings, interrogations, and threats. General Morrison was livid. The baptism had been recorded by every camera in the facility, documented by instruments that registered phenomena they couldn't explain, witnessed by dozens of personnel who would never forget what they'd seen. The general wanted it all classified, buried, erased from existence. He wanted me to sign documents swearing I'd never speak of this, to pretend it had never happened. I refused. On the 3rd day, they confined me to my quarters. A sterile room deep in the facility where I'd been essentially imprisoned while they decided what to do with me. I spent the time in prayer, processing everything I'd witnessed, trying to understand what it meant for theology, for humanity, for everything I'd believed about the universe. It was 3 a.m. when I woke to find my room filled with light. Not the harsh, fluorescent light of the facility, but a soft, warm radiance that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and heard a voice I recognized. Father Ashford, peace be with you. Seraph? I whispered into the darkness, though the room was anything but dark now. Yes, though I am not as I was. I am transformed, reborn into the eternal realm your faith promised, and I have been given permission to return, briefly, to deliver a message, not just to you, but through you to all of humanity. The light coalesced into a form that was recognizably Seraph, but also fundamentally different, more radiant, more present, more real than anything I'd ever seen, as if everything else in existence was just a shadow, and this was substance itself. You're really there, I said, tears streaming down my face. The realm beyond death. It's real. More real than the material universe, Father. This realm is the foundation. Your world is the reflection. And you humans, you're designed to exist in both simultaneously. That's what makes you unique. That's what makes you sacred. Why are you telling me this? Because the others are coming, just as I said. Within your lifetime, humanity will make open contact with dozens of extraterrestrial species. Some will come seeking trade, some will come seeking knowledge, but many will come seeking what only you can offer, the path to the eternal, the bridge between material existence and divine reality. Seraph's form moved closer, and I felt warmth like standing in sunlight. Your species has a choice to make, Father. You can hoard grace like a commodity, use it as leverage for power and technology, or you can offer it freely, the way you offered it to me. If you choose the first path, you become like every other species, advanced but empty, powerful but lost. If you choose the second path, you become what you were always meant to be, shepherds of souls, bridges between the finite and infinite, the species that shows the galaxy what redemption means. How do I convince them? I asked. The military wants to suppress everything. The church is uncertain. Most people won't believe any of this happened. You don't need to convince everyone, Father. Just tell the truth. Share what you witnessed. Plant seeds of understanding that will grow when the time is right. And trust that the same grace that saved me will guide humanity toward its purpose. The light began to fade, and I felt panic rise in my chest. Wait, will I see you again? When your own time comes to cross over, I'll be among those who welcome you. Until then, know that I'm proof of everything your faith taught. The soul is real. Grace is real. Love transcends all boundaries, including species, including worlds, including death itself. Live in that truth, Father, and help your people live in it too. The light vanished, and I was alone in the darkness of my quarters. But I wasn't the same person who had fallen asleep 3 hours earlier. I had received a message from beyond death, confirmation of everything I'd believed and more than I'd dared to imagine. The next morning, Colonel Bennett came to my room with news. General Morrison had been overruled. Orders had come from the highest levels of government, levels I didn't even know existed, that I was to be released with a full record of everything that had happened. The powers that be had decided, against Morrison's furious objections, that suppressing this was more dangerous than revealing it. There are people in government who believe we need to prepare humanity for what's coming, Bennett explained. They think your story, Seraph's story, is the beginning of that preparation. They want you to tell it, Father, not to everyone, not all at once, but to those who are ready to hear. I was released that afternoon. I returned to my parish in Colorado Springs, to the small rectory where this had all begun, feeling like I'd been gone for years instead of days. Everything looked the same, but I saw it all differently now. The people in my congregation weren't just humans going about human lives. They were eternal beings, souls designed to bridge the gap between matter and spirit, carrying within them the capacity to offer grace to an entire galaxy. I began to teach differently, to preach differently. Not dramatically. I couldn't reveal the classified details, not yet, but with a new emphasis on the infinite scope of God's love, the reality of consciousness beyond death, the importance of extending grace to all who seek it, regardless of how different they might seem. And I waited, as Seraph had told me to wait, for the day when humanity would be ready to learn the truth. That we are not alone in the universe, that we never have been, and that our purpose is far greater than we'd ever imagined. We are the bridges, the species designed to show all conscious beings the path to the eternal, the ones who carry within us the capacity to transform not just ourselves, but an entire galaxy through the infinite power of grace. 3 weeks after my return, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sentence in handwriting I didn't recognize. Protocol 7 has been activated. Prepare your people. They're coming. I looked up at the stars that night, those distant points of light that I'd always seen as beautiful but remote. Now I knew better. Those stars held worlds. Those worlds held consciousness. And that consciousness was seeking what only humanity could offer. The age of isolation was ending. The age of revelation was beginning. And I had been given a front row seat to the most important transformation in human history. I was ready. We all needed to be. Because the universe was so much larger, so much stranger, and so much more sacred than anyone had dared to believe. And humanity's greatest adventure wasn't exploring the stars. It was teaching the stars how to come home.